Welcome back to the GCN Racing News Show. Coming up this week, the Spring Classics are over and there's one man who's still been making almost all the headlines. I'll be looking back at Pogačar's latest dominant exploits and ask, where do we go from here? Is there even an end in sight to his dominance? This week in the world of racing, we learnt that the Mur de Huy is nowhere near as steep as we all thought. Look, you can just spin up it in the saddle. We also learnt that 7-Eleven are back. In what is the coolest one-off mid-season changes of kit I've ever seen, Uno X raced Liège-Bastogne-Liège in a replica 7-Eleven kit. Why? Well, Uno X is part of Right Hand Retail, who also own over 100 7-Eleven stores in Scandinavia. And finally, we learnt that Tadej Pogačar's spring campaign couldn't have gone much better. Liège-Bastogne-Liège marked his 14th day of racing in 2025 and his 7th win. Now, this is normally the point of the show where I start to break down how the race was won, who underperformed, who overperformed, who got their tactics wrong. Well, here's how I'm going to break it down for you. UAE rode hard through the hill zone, putting the hurt on everyone else, and then on La Redoute, Pogačar attacked. In the saddle, before his teammate Brandon McNulty even had to come to the front to do his turn. Pogačar didn't even get out of the saddle the entire way up, in fact. He looked well within himself and said as much in his post-race interview. And that was the end of that. Because he hadn't gone to his limit and the others had, he extended his lead over the top to the point where it was a minute and a half and then had plenty of time to celebrate in the finishing straight. Spring done, job done, it was nice seeing you all. So he crossed the line in a little over 6 hours, making it the fastest Liège-Bastogne-Liège ever at a shade under 42 kilometers per hour. How fast did he ride up La Redoute? Well, he did take the Strava KOM, which is one that has been ridden almost 100,000 times. There already beat to that segment was the young Belgian super talent Jarno Vida, who'd set his time on a training ride in 2023 as a 17-year-old. Pogačar was 14 seconds quicker than Evenepoel when the Belgian made his winning attack 2 years ago, but that day the conditions were cold and wet, so far from perfect if you're looking to set the fastest time. So in that context, Pogačar's time was exceptional on La Redoute, but not alien-like. And we've also got to consider that the way these races are being ridden is completely different to how it was just 4 years ago. And what I mean by that is that the races are opening up a lot earlier. I think we can look at the Rochelle-Faucon climb as an example of that, because it was there that the real decisive attacks would happen in the past, and that's reflected in the times. David Gaudu and Mike Woods hold the KOM up there from the 2021 edition of the race, and they were 11 seconds quicker than the fastest rider this year, and that was Ben Healy, who was the only rider in the top 10 of that segment from the last 4 years. Pogačar's time up that climb this year was 20 seconds slower than the fastest and 18 seconds slower than his own personal best, which was set in that race in 2020. Now obviously conditions make a huge difference as well, but I think the way these races are being ridden is the biggest factor. Riders aren't waiting until the final climb anymore to make their efforts, except in Flèche Wallonne, more on that later on. Behind Pogačar, it was a race for second place, and that's something I think we always need to consider in the Pogačar era. We're always wondering what riders and teams can do to beat him, and it happens just enough to give us, and perhaps them, hope that they can. But it happens when either A, the course doesn't suit him perfectly, like San Remo or Roubaix, or B, he's not at 100%, as appeared to be the case at Amstel Gold a week ago. When it's a course that does suit him, and he's at 100%, it's nigh on impossible to beat him. You can think up all the tactical scenarios in the world, but with an incredibly strong team built entirely around him, the reality is there's almost nothing you can do. So anyway, Ben Healy and Giulio Ciccone were the two riders fighting it out for the other 2 steps on the podium. Both were very impressive throughout the finale of the race yesterday. Ciccone was the only one who really looked like he might manage to close the gap to Pogačar, whilst Healy was always in the mix in his usual sort of never say die style. And so it felt fitting that they finished 2nd and 3rd respectively. Behind them, there was a huge sprint for 4th place. A group of 40 riders came to the line together, and it was Astana's Simone Velasco who proved fastest of them, picking up another 440 UCI points for the team, which is massive for them. In fact, they're third in the team rankings for 2025 in terms of UCI points, and what many thought looked like certain demotion from the World Tour for them at the end of this year is now much more in the balance. Cofidis and Picnic Post-NL must be much more worried than they were 3 months ago. Lidl Trek also picked up a bundle of UCI points, not that they need them. As well as Cicconi's second place, they also picked up 5th and 6th with Nace and Baggioli respectively. Martinez, Laurence, Pidcock and Powless rounded up the top 10 on the day. So, some Pogačar stats again. First up, not only is the only rider to have podiumed all 4 spring monuments this year, he was the only male rider to even start all 4 races. He's doing something that is almost unprecedented in this modern era of cycling. In his last 7 races on Belgian soil, he's won 6. The only one he didn't win was Liège-Bastogne-Liège back in 2023, where he crashed out, of course. The ones that he won? Well, 2 Tour of Flanders, 2 Flèche Wallonne and 2 Liège-Bastogne-Liège. Not fish and chipper races. He's the first rider in history to have finished on the podium of 6 monuments in succession. He's now won 9 monuments in total, which puts him level with Fausto Coppi, Constante Girardengo and most recently Sean Kelly, who hadn't won a single monument by the time he was Pogačar's current age. When he wins 2 more, and that's a when, not an if, Pogačar will draw level with Roger de Vlaeminck. However, he's not yet reached half the tally of Eddy Merckx, which means the comparison is going to be going on for some time yet, particularly as Merckx reached a tally of 9 monument wins when he was 9 months younger than Pogačar is now. As another comparison with the greats, Pogačar is one of only 3 riders to have finished on the podium of the first 4 monuments in a single season. Sean Kelly did it in 1984, Merckx did it twice, in 1969 and 1975. However, neither of them went on to finish on the podium of Il Lombardia in those years, so Pogačar has a chance to do something that neither of them ever did, and you would be a very brave person to bet against it. So, on to the question that I posed in the intro. Where do we go from here? By that I mean, what happens next? Does Pogačar just continue to dominate for the rest of this season and next, and the one after that? Well, given the chasm that we saw between him and the rest in the hilliest races, I'd say yes, he's very likely to dominate for the rest of this season. Next year? Well, his motivation doesn't seem to be waning, does it? And his form is as good as it's ever been, so it would be more of a surprise if he doesn't continue in the same fashion than if he does. What about in 2 years' time then? Well, who knows? Things can change so quickly in sport, and there's always a point at which a generational talent starts to fade or another generational talent emerges when you least expect it. I know a lot of you are hoping and perhaps praying for the return of less predictable racing, and in some ways I am too, but I'm still at that point where I'm in awe of what I'm watching. I just never thought I'd see something like this in my lifetime, so for the moment I'm more than fine with it. Let me know what you think at home. How long will Pogačar's dominance continue? Are you switching off, or are you a bigger fan of the sport than you've ever been? Let me know by writing down in the comment section below. Just before I move on from the men's Liège-Bastogne-Liège, I wanted to give a shout out to Visma Lease Bike's Tiesj Benoot after a stat I saw from Jonas Creteur on X. So in the Tour of Flanders, Amstel Gold, Flèche Wallonne and Liège-Bastogne-Liège, Benoot has finished in the top 15 22 times in a row. That really is exceptional consistency at the very highest level, so congratulations Tiesj. With that, I'll move on to the women's race, which was far less predictable despite the biggest names in the sport taking part. Demi Vollering, Elisa Longo Borghini and Lotte Kopecky were the biggest names on the start line. Maja Squiben was the last of the early breakaway to get caught on the upper slopes of La Redoute, and it was on that climb where we saw the first major move, but it was out the back rather than off the front. Longo Borghini, the Italian champion, clearly wasn't herself on the day, getting distance before things had really started to get serious. Puk Pieterse led the race over the top of that climb, but it was still quite a big group there, around 15 riders. And it was from that group that Paulina Royakkers put in a dig for Fenix de Koning, leaving Puk Pieterse in a great position behind. Royakkers was then joined by Niedermayer, Cabal and Van der Breggen, meaning 4 strong teams represented at the front without FDJ Suez. Thankfully for Demi Vollering though, she still had Labou and Chabi with her to control behind, which meant the quartet never got more than 30 seconds of a lead. Chabi was particularly impressive, I've got to say, almost single-handedly bringing it back below 10 seconds with 24k to go. The gap then started to reverse though, and Movistar were forced to join the chase ahead of the Côte de Roche of Faucon. Royakkers on that climb initially looked like she was dropped, but given how well she worked for Petersen straight after, I think it must have been part of the team plan. Petersen attacked off the back of her teammates' pace setting, and over the top we had what looked to be the winning move of four: Petersen, Kopecky, Vollering and Cabal. The French women countered over the top, banking on the other big names looking at each other, and for a fleeting moment, they did. Marlon Reusser also bridged to them at that point. So with 11Ks to go, we then had a change that you could easily have missed had you taken your eyes off the screen for just a fleeting moment. Just as the world champion Lotte Kopecky was being dropped in her rainbow jersey, Kim LeCour of AG Insurance bridged the gap in her Mauritius Champions jersey, which looks nigh on exactly the same. A couple of Ks later, we had a group of four at the front, which looked exactly the same, except it was LeCour there instead of Kopecky. Now, with no attacks between there and the finish, it came down to a sprint between the four of them. Vollering was on the front, as she often likes to be, and it looked from the shot that we got like all four of them happened to start their sprint at exactly the same time. Then on the overhead shot, we could then see that LeCour was going past Vollering at quite some pace, such a pace that nobody got around her. She took by far the biggest win of her career so far, and you've got to say that was thoroughly deserved. She's been the revelation of the Spring Classics this year. 9th in Binder, 5th in Flanders and Sanremo, 6th in Flèche, and now a win at Liège. Petersen took yet another solid result with second, whilst Vollering just about held on for third in front of Cabal, whilst Kopecky won the sprint behind for fifth. Moving on to La Flèche Wallonne now. No prizes for guessing who won the men's race if you haven't already seen it. Pogačar blasted up the Mur de Huy in what were fairly atrocious weather conditions. Not as bad as last year, but actually not too far off. The expected battle between him and Evenepoel didn't really materialise, so the Belgian said after the race he'd taken his rain jacket off too early and got really cold. Instead then, best of the rest was Kevin Vauquelin of Arkea B&B Hotels, with Tom Pidcock in third. Incidentally, it was the biggest ever winning margin in the men's race when the bunches come to the foot of that climb together, according to Killian Kelly. In the women's race, we had a very popular winner. At least it was for me, and I'm fairly confident it would have been for many others as well. Demi Vollering set her usual very high tempo on that final climb, but on this occasion she wasn't able to distance everybody else. Far from it, Puck Pieter had enough left to go past the FDJ Suez rider and hold her off all the way to the finish line. That was her first one-day race win on the road, and it's been a reasonably long time coming, but it was only a matter of time, wasn't it? She's been incredibly consistent this spring. 11 one-day races so far, and she's finished all of them in the top 10. She is so good. Vollering had to set up a second on the day with Longo Borghini in third, but the most disappointed team must have been SD Works. They worked for Lotte Kopecky, who just didn't have it on the day. And that was the first time in over 2 years that SD Works have started a one-day race at World Tour level and not had someone finish in the top 10. Right, on to the Tour of the Alps now, which produced some fantastic racing last week and a whole load of long-range winning attacks. I'll start where I left off on last week's show, which means stage 2. There, Michael Storer of Tudor Pro Cycling laid the foundations for overall victory with a brilliant performance on the second ascent at the Telvez de Sopra. He distanced all of his rivals there and sailed to a solo win over 40 seconds in front of everybody else. On stage 3, Israel Premier Tech's Marco Frigo took his first pro win in quite epic fashion. He attacked the breakaway with 78 Ks to go and held off the race favourites by 19 seconds. Well done, Marco. There was another solo win from the breakaway the following day, and one that actually led to a big change in the general classification. Taman Arensman of Ineos Grenadiers rode away with 76k to go, and despite Storer's best efforts, he couldn't close the gap enough to retain the leader's jersey, which Arensman took by 11 seconds. His power that day was something else, as this infographic from Matti Pirelli on X shows, averaging well over 400 watts on all the major climbs that stage, of which there were a lot. So it left Storer and Tudor Pro Cycling with some work to do on the 5th and final stage, but they did pull it off. Storer managed to distance Arensman and ride away to his third overall stage race win. He didn't win the stage though. The breakaway once again fought it out for those honours, and it was a pair of riders from Decathlon AG2R who decided the win between them. 18-year-old Paul Sexas, who continues to impress, gifted the win to his much more experienced teammate Nicolas Prudhomme. The 28-year-old turned pro back in 2021, but hadn't taken a pro win until last Friday. Six Ass now has a domestique for life, I reckon. One more race that I'll very quickly summarise. Marc Soler took his first 2 wins of the season at the Vuelta Asturias last week. He won the final stage and with that the overall classification. Stage 1 was won by Stef Kras. Again, a very popular winner because he's had so many bad crashes and resulting injuries over the past few years, and his ability to come back to the top is always incredibly impressive. Unfortunately, and slightly ironically, straight after taking his first pro victory, he crashed out of the race the following day. Ivan Garcia Cortina and Alessandro Covi took stages 2 and 3 respectively, and UAE now have 35 wins in 2025 so far, the most that any team's had by this point in the season since the World Tour, or the Pro Tour as it was back then, was introduced in 2005. Just before I finish, a reminder you can watch a full season of bike racing live on Discovery Plus and Max. This week we've got the tours of Turkey and Romandy, but believe it or not, there's only 11 days now until the start of the first Grand Tour of the season, the Giro d'Italia. And the good news for those of you who've gotten bored of watching Pogačar dominate is he's not racing it this year, so we really do have a wide open race in 2025. We'll have our preview for that race out in just over a week's time. Okay, that's all for this week's show. Just to let you know though, we've got another bank holiday here in the UK next Monday. We're all very lazy over here, so I'll be back with a racing news show on Tuesday next week. See you then.